Yes, friends, in this next video, we file with the data. So we have to clear about the how to use this data with using of this value. So we want to do this value. On the basis of this one, we have to clear idea about the what we want to do in the macro also. Now, if you go for this macro, all the macro we will store from the this workbook and new workbook. Record macro. We want to store this macro in this workbook and new workbook. Personal macro workbook. Personal macro workbook. What do you mean by the personal macro workbook? Personal macro workbook is basically work from the personally you want to work. If you want to use the this workbook, it means that the workbook is only working from this workbook and file save as macro enable workbook. Now we want to create some simple macro and using a personal macro workbook. So we have to some idea about what is actually true for this workbook and what is actually true for the personal macro workbook, right? Personal macro workbook, it means that this is only work from this side only. If you are using the macro workbook, it means that it will be used from not this personal laptop. It will be used from whenever you are sending this file to another person, another data, you can send it. If file first save as macro enable workbook, desktop, and okay. If all the data is in save in macro enable workbook, then we can do this macro enable workbook. So this is called as a macro enable workbook. Macro record workbook and a macro, this is this workbook, personal macro workbook, and only for this workbook and personal macro workbook. New workbook, you know about the new workbook. This workbook, it's mean that we want to save this workbook to another PC, another computer. If I'm changing here personal macro workbook, then what can we have to? We want to only for total only. Personal macro workbook, record workbook, and this is called as the personal macro workbook. And okay, if you use personal macro workbook, open from recording. Okay, record option. Yes. Whenever I'm doing the personal macro workbook, we have a data with a different personal file. For example, here is a personal macro workbook. If you want to do this personal macro workbook, personal macro workbook is in the startup folder, must be stay open for recording. So it will be unable to record. It is on starter folder. Whenever I am using the starter value personal macro workbook, then start the first the recording macro, then we will start from the macro file. Yes, we will personal macro workbook, we will discuss this personal macro in the next value. We have a multiple files, so we have do this personal macro workbook. Now we want to continue with another format, another value. This is called as particular value, and how we will set this value in the set this format. For example, if I am do with the data and plus minus multiply all this value, then how it is useful from this data, then we want to go for the view tab and we want to arrange all the data. For example, I will go for the developer tab, visual basics, and if I am putting here some macro, this is called module 1, this is our macro. If you want to create a new modules, then we can create a new modules. If you want to create a sheet 1 dot protection of data, if you want to sheet 2 dot protection of the data, we want to create our new workbook. If you want to add the new workbook, then we have a view record macro, macro number 7, and stop recording. Here is a stop recording, view macro, macro number 7, and edit this macro. Now you can edit this macro at that time. Which thing you are written here, it will be work on this side. So if you want to write down anything which you are doing with your own place, own way, at that time we have to do this recording of this file. If you are recording for that file, so you can create this particular file. On the basis of this particular file, so if you want to put the new data in your file, this is a new way, and how to put out in the data, that is a particular how to particular give the password and what are you are doing with this value. For example, if I'm doing any value cell selected, for example, if I'm putting sheet number 3 here, sheet 3, and select range, for example, b1 dot value equal to 1, right? When I'm putting the macro number 7, sheet number 3, range b1 dot value, if I'm writing here, write down, assign the macro, macro number 7, and okay. When I'm pressing this value, you have to check that b1 dot value it equivalent to 1. Now you can have a clear idea about this one. Whenever I am putting the any value in a different place, different location, we have to go for the different value. At that time we have to know about the but VBA, but we have a clear idea about the VBA. If you don't have a clear idea, then you cannot not do anything with the VBA. So first we have a know about the VBA language. After going from this VBA language, you have to put out the any formula, any things you have to put out this. If this is a pivot table, for example, if it is a pivot table, then okay, if I'm putting here the value on the basis of the roll number, subject 2, subject 3, and subject 1 total. If I am putting this value here, then the method is get pivot table. So this get pivot table also working with your coding part also. So we are working with the get pivot table working this file also. So we have to do with this file. On the basis of this file, you have to put out all the value. You have to click on this value and we have to clear of this value. So on the basis of this one, we have to clear about the idea, about the value. So if the value is clear, we want to clearing this value, and if you want to get this value, you have to work this the data. So now we have to clear idea about particular value and how this value is set on the particular section. Now, so make sure that you have to clear idea about the value and how this value you have to use your particular data. So now this is a get pivot table. If I'm plus this value, for example, 30 value is plus for that, so the value is 220. So any big project you are working with your own pivot table with using of this value, then you can use this value on the working of this data. So now you can easily use this data. On the basis of this data, we have to work this the value. So we want to work this value on the basis of this data. So we want to do this data on the particular data wise. So we have to clear idea about the data one. So 220, this is your value. On the basis of this value, we have to put out any value. And on value, on basis, we have to now clear idea about how to fetch the data, how to clear the data, and how to work with your data. So now you want to do this value. On this value, we have to particular data file. So we have to particular data file. On the basis of this data file, we want to clarity about the how to using the macro with your file. This is a mainly important. You are using the every places with using of macro. Wrap text with using of macro, merge and center we are using with this macro. We can do the every places we are using this macro. Bold, italic, underline, we are using this macro. All the places we are using this macro, but we have not clear idea about the particular the data. So we want to first clear idea. So we can do the anything with your file and everything with your file. Okay, friends, we can discuss with the next part.